Nothing quenches a summer thirst quite like a tall glass of homemade iced tea. Today, we are celebrating Iced Tea Month with this refreshing drink 3 delicious ways. I'm going to show you my classic iced tea recipe, then an unbelievable raspberry peach iced tea, and finally a mojito-inspired iced tea that you guys are going to love. Now let's get started with our classic iced tea recipe. So I'm going to get started by adding some hot water to a heat-proof glass container. It's really important to use heat-proof glass for this because you don't want it to shatter when you add the hot water. You could also use a teapot for this if that's what you have on hand. No problem at all. So I'm adding my hot water to my heat-proof glass container, and to that I'm going to add my tea bags. Now I'm using 6 tea bags for 8 cups of water. But if you prefer a stronger iced tea, feel free to use a few more tea bags. It's totally up to you. Next, I'm going to add some lemon zest. Now this is an optional step, but I find it adds a nice lemony flavor to my final iced tea. So all I'm going to do is take a vegetable peeler and gently peel off the zest of my lemon. What you want to do is avoid as much of the pith as possible because it tends to be a bit bitter. Once I've added my zest, I'm going to let my tea steep for 5 minutes. You don't want to oversteep your tea because it can create a really bitter flavor. Once your tea is finished steeping, you want to remove your tea bags and your zest. Then we want to let our tea cool completely. In the meantime, I'm going to create a simple sweetener for my tea. Now, I know a lot of people prefer their tea unsweetened, and if that's the case for you, just skip over this step, no big deal. All I've got is some honey standing by, again in a heat-proof glass container, and to that I'm going to add some boiling water. I'm going to stir it until my honey's dissolved completely, and then I'm going to set it aside and let it cool. Once all of my ingredients have cooled, it's time to assemble my iced tea. So in my pitcher, I have a whole lot of ice, and to that I'm going to add some lemon slices. You could also do this with orange slices. That would be super delicious. Next, I'm going to add my honey sweetener, and finally, my cold steep tea. I'm going to give it all a good stir, and this iced tea is ready to serve. How very refreshing. Next, I'm going to show you my delightfully delicious raspberry peach iced tea. Now for this tasty treat, you could totally use black tea, that would definitely work, but today instead I'm going to be using one of my very favorite uncaffeinated teas, rooibos. Now if you're not familiar with rooibos, it is a very mildly flavored South African tea that has a bevy of health benefits. So all I'm going to do is add my rooibos tea bags to some hot water and let this steep for about 5 minutes. Once our tea has finished steeping, I'm going to remove the tea bags and set it aside until it cools completely. Now I'm choosing not to sweeten this tea, but if you wanted to sweeten it, you could definitely do that using the method I showed you for the classic iced tea. Once our tea is cooled completely, we can assemble our iced tea. So in my pitcher, I've got a whole lot of ice, and to that, I'm going to be adding some sliced peaches. I'm using white peaches in this recipe, but you could use any kind of peaches you like. I'm also going to be adding some fresh raspberries. Then I'm going to finish it off with my beautiful rooibos tea, give it a good stir, and it is ready to drink. Finally, we are going to wrap things up today with my incredibly refreshing mojito-inspired iced tea. Not to worry though, there's no rum in this recipe. So, for this iced tea, I'm going to be using green tea. You could definitely do this with black tea if you wanted to, but I think green tea is a great complement to the rest of these flavors. All I'm going to do is steep my green tea for 3 to 5 minutes. I'm also adding the zest of 1 lime to my green tea while it steeps. Once it's finished steeping, I'm going to remove my tea bags and my zest and set it aside until it's cooled completely. While my green tea is cooling, I'm going to get started on my sweetener for this recipe. Instead of using honey, I'm going to use some white sugar, and to that, I'm just going to add some boiling water and stir it until the sugar dissolves. I'm going to set this aside and let it cool completely. Finally, I've got my pitcher full of ice, and to that, I'm going to add some fresh lime slices and some fresh mint. I'm going to add my sweetener and my green tea and give this all a good stir. I should warn you, this stuff is highly addictive, like 3 glasses a day addictive. Don't say I didn't warn you. I hope you'll give these 3 tasty recipes a try, and if you do, be sure to tweet or Instagram me a photo because you know I love seeing what you're coming up with in your very own kitchens. And finally, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to The Domestic Geek because there's lots more deliciousness where this came from.